Hello, I'm John Ciovacco, the co-chair of the NY-GEO 2023 conference and a board member of the New York Geothermal Energy Organization. I'd like to welcome you to this recording of a live presentation from the conference, a two-day event which was held in Albany, New York on April 26th and 27th of 2023. This year's educational sessions and keynotes represent the latest in ground source heat pump system design, product innovations, and installation practices, along with important policy, regulatory, financing, and incentive updates. This presentation is one of over 40 sessions from the two-day event, all of which were recorded and available at NY-GEO's website, www.ny-geo.org, along with session descriptions and a link to download the slides from each of the sessions presented. NY-GEO is proud to make this content available to our members and other industry stakeholders, and if you are a member, thanks so much for your support and participation. If you find this content valuable and for some odd reason you are not yet a member, consider joining NY-GEO at the appropriate membership level with details available at our website. The live recording from the NY-GEO 2023 conference will start in just a moment. Thanks so much for listening.
This is the from worst to first. I know worst is a little bit extreme, but it's just fun to talk about. We really have, and I think that lots of folks really don't know. Maybe even our industry people don't know, but I think when the world finds out some of the things we're going to talk about today, we've got that much more of a challenge. Certainly the climate goals that a lot of states have, like New York, are challenging enough, super aggressive. And I do think, too, that now we've got, in some ways, a financial support base that makes that much more achievable. I mean, even since last time we were here, I mean, it's radical. It really is. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that in today's session and talk about some of the history that Dan's going to go through, some of what transpired recently that Ryan's going to talk through. And then we're going to have Zeyneb talk about things that maybe aren't quite as tax credit or tax benefit related, but are other implications of the IRA that are going to help leverage our industry into another gear. And then Zach's going to talk some about the different ways that building owners and developers can utilize these things and what it really means. What are the implications of what's just transpired and sort of as it rolls out. We are going to have a session right after this, unpacking the IRA, which is going to talk about some of the uncertainties, some of the things we don't know about this yet. And we'll talk a little bit about that. You can't avoid those things. But this is more about just trying to get folks a little better flavor for what's really happened and the magnitude of that. So I'm going to just jump right in. So why don't we go start out with Dan Ellis. He's with Comfortworks. He's also here helping out Climate Master. He's doing a session at the end of the day where he's going to have a spreadsheet that he's worked with Climate Master on, which is about how to calculate your incentive. So it's kind of a nuts and bolts session towards the end of the day today that I think will be really nice too. Yep, that's your talking stick. You can either keep it on there. Holding it actually on is my recommendation.
Really?
But yeah,
I have a piece of paper.
Oh, great.
I don't know if I can
do what you
handle two
have
things
to
at
do,
once
Dan.
yet this morning. But good morning. What I'd like to do is lay down a background of how we got here. Look at this IRA that rolled out, which is a monumental shift for our entire industry, that piece of legislation. But there was a long track record that built it. Just in the beginning, there was a tax credit for geothermal heat pumps, 1978 to 82, enacted by President Carter administration. Okay, closer. Okay, just sounds echoey from here. What happened there? They launched solar, wind, and geothermal. Immediately, some geothermal people, which there weren't very many then, got involved in it and accidentally launched our industry. But by 1981, the IRS decided that it had to be high temperature geothermal for direct use in heating, or it wasn't geothermal. So we were excluded, but it did lay a foundation, and we got creative. You could couple solar thermal with it, put that energy in the ground loop, and still get a tax credit. But the credit ended under President Reagan, In 88, the industry was pretty quiet. In 88, a couple of us got together and decided to go to D.C. We formed the Earth Energy Association. There was really no momentum in particular going on other than our vice president was from the backyard of water furnace where I was at the time and expressed an interest, and we laid down some groundwork. But in 92, at the end of that, we just had one of those serendipitous things. We were on a plane coming back from D.C. with a legislator that was over Ways and Means and the water and energy side of things, and we had been working with EEI, the Edison Electric Institute, on a program. By 92, Clinton and Gore administration was in. They had a climate change goal, as you can imagine. The electric utilities felt like we should voluntarily do something before they mandate something that we would like less. And so we were able to get $20 million to start an organization called the Geothermal Heat Pump Consortium. And that was mainly IOUs, but it also included, we were, the guys that got it all put together, we weren't allowed to vote or be on the board. We had a vested interest, as if the utilities didn't. I never could understand that. But we got it going, and there was a lot of matching funds. The DOE money was matched like 5 or 6 to 1 by utility programs. Some of this was market programs. But one of the key things that came out of it, and I have to thank Dave Hatherton. I sent him to D.C. at the time. He was working on things. He started working with EPA. A report came out, one of the monumental reports for this industry in 1993 called Space Conditioning, the Next Frontier. You can still download it on the EPA website, but I'm sure you've seen the highlight quotes from it. That per EPA, geothermal heat pumps are the most efficient, cost-effective, least carbon emissions of any space conditioning technology. And it's like a, 100-page report on that. And that has been used for decades, even to this day. It's part of many people's presentations. So, but after 2000, GHP started struggling because the utilities, they were driven by demand-side management to get involved in our programs, but then that all got overshadowed by deregulation. They all went back into a closet, said, we don't even know if these people that we're incenting are going to be our customers anymore, and they just disappeared. So basically, things just slowed to a halt. And but then EPAC came along in 2005 and gave incentives but not to us. Solar, wind, and some other technologies received the first federal incentive since that 1982. So in 2007, Congress changed. The last part of the Bush administration's term, Congress went completely Democratic. They had some aggressive goals, and
I don't know how many pages you have there, but
don't worry.
Yeah.
And so, don't completely worry. So basically, we launched a full-out effort, and at that time, nobody in the industry wanted to go. So Climate Master did it, and spent a couple $1 million, hired 2 high-level lobbying firms, one named Giuliani, the other named Podesta. So we covered both sides of the aisle that way. We're still working with one side of that with GEO today. We had all kinds of support from other organizations, and I'm just trying to give you an idea how much work it is to get things done. There were a sponsorship. We had like 45 meetings with members of Congress to get that, 45 being pretty much our lobbyists and myself, actually.
And this is 2008, 7?
7.
Yep.
7 and 8. And then we had other meetings to get co-sponsors for the bill of another 115 meetings on the Hill. So I was there every other week for about a year and a half. And then we met with all kinds of leadership, House Ways and Means, Joint Committee on Tax, Senate Finance, DOE, GSA, VA, EIA. And then we had direct meetings. I had direct meetings with Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Reid. And the end result of that, we were able to get 2 bills in 2008 that came out, one in the House that had 42 bipartisan co-sponsors. It was very interesting to do at that day. But surprisingly, for geothermal, there was strong support from even the right, because they viewed it as a U.S. technology. This isn't, we're going to be importing things from China to do this, and I'm not trying to demur anything about solar or anything, but for a while that was a big part of it and still is significant. In the Senate, we had 20 bipartisan co-sponsors, so we had these two bills, and it always takes some train leaving the station in an emergency situation to get something done, but there was the economy, what happened in 2008, the big crash. They had an Emergency Economic Stabilization Act that was signed in the waning moments of Bush's regime that included 8 years of tax credits for us, and we achieved our tax 30% credit. It was capped at $2,000. We thought that was enough back then. We didn't want to overheat the market, and the 10% commercial credit, and then after the election with President Obama, there was an economic stimulus bill passed, and that was a major leap forward because basically our lobbying was whatever you do for one of these technologies, do for all. Well, they took the cap off. There's suddenly 30% no cap for residential and 10%, with the accelerated. So that was signed into law in 2009. So it was many, many hundreds of meetings, and I think the main takeaway I would like to give you is, number one, these things don't just happen. These legislators don't get to the Hill and have any idea what they're supposed to be doing when it comes to, are they supposed to know every subject matter area that they would cover as a legislator? They don't. You have to go in there, you have to educate them. It takes a lot of legwork, footwork, elbow grease. You got to constantly go. Our role was educational, always educational, and so you have to keep your foot on the pedal all the time, and as soon as you let off the gas, somebody's going to hit the brakes somewhere else and you don't even know about it. And when that effort was completed, GEO was formed, and I'll let Ryan take it from there.
That's perfect.
Thanks, Dan.
That's perfect. and also, just Dan and others here did a lot of that work. I mean, that was work. He actually had a full-time job at the time that wasn't this, and trying to keep that down as well.
Yeah, so. But Dan, you were basically living in Washington for quite a period of time, and I just really want to underline this point. It was because of Dan that this all happened, that the geothermal heat pump industry got into the revenue code thanks to this man. And so at a certain point he said, why am I doing this by myself? Why don't we get the band back together and we can all do this collectively as an industry, and that's sort of the rebirth of GeoExchange at that point. I came onto the scene in 2014. I left the state of Illinois to take the job as the chief operating officer, and Dan talked about taking things for granted. I don't want to say that the industry took anything for granted, but in 2015, it was a bit of a shocker at the end of the year in an omnibus budget negotiation that a deal was cut it was a horse trade, as so often happens in Washington, D.C. The Democrats, Harry Reid, who was the majority leader at the time, really wanted to extend solar and wind credits, but this was a year before they were expiring, and nobody knew this except a few key people. He wanted to do this in exchange for lifting the oil export ban. So these negotiations always happen behind closed doors at the last minute, and so they hatched this plan, and they forgot to include geothermal heat pumps. And we were left out of this deal. It was characterized as a drafting error at the time. And Speaker Pelosi came out and said, we made a whoopsie in the bill, and we're going to fix it next month. Well, next month turned into a year. And then we went off the cliff, and if you were around in 2017, that was not a fun period in our industry's history. It had real serious detrimental impacts, and we were very, very aggressive over that time. We had and I mentioned this last night, we had a number of champions throughout Congress, but we really turned our effort into overdrive at that point. We did nearly 400 meetings over a 2-year period. We were part of a group because we weren't the only technology that was left out. Combined heat and power, small wind, fuel cells, microturbines. We were known as the orphan technologies. that's not fun to be like traipsing around Capitol Hill and they're like, oh my God, it's the orphans again. And we really did kind of wear out our welcome because we were just so persistent. And we had a lot of champions. It was a New York Congressman, Tom Reed, from the Finger Lakes region, who was the chief sponsor of our legislation, H.R. 1090. And we were very, very specific about how we were approaching this legislation. For every Republican we got on the bill, because it was a Republican carrying it, we put one Democrat on the bill. And of course, all the Democrats wanted to get onto this legislation, but we said, no, it's got to be 1 and 1. We got to 118 co-sponsors at the end of the day. And a lot of Republicans did not want to join onto this bill because Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, told them, do not sign on to this legislation. And we kept peeling them off one after another. And how do we do that? We would go to their offices and we would take a contractor, we would take a business owner in their district and say, look at these people who are employing individuals in your district and what they do for the economy, what they do for homeowners and business owners. And it was like you'd see the light bulb go off, and they would say, the speaker told me not to, but I'm co-sponsoring this legislation. Eventually, we got into a big budget package, and President Trump, in February of 2018, signed the credits back into law. It's a testament to the unwavering persistence of GEO Exchange over the course of those 2 years. We never gave up. But it's not like flipping a light switch. The credits came back, and we had a long way to go in terms of rebuilding the industry. And we're still, in many ways, building back. Got 2 minutes here. What do I want to talk about? So the IRA, where did that come from? I talked about it a little last night, and we can get into the gory details of the legislation, but there are many ways this bill could have gone sideways. I mean, so Biden came into office, and he said, I'm the climate president, we're going to do big things, and we took him at his word. We started working very diligently because we knew the only way this was going to be accomplished was through the reconciliation process. And we were working with the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Green Team as they made the sausage. They were cooking this thing up, and they were doing all sorts of crazy things with our technology. They stuck us into the section of the code where air source credits are, and they capped us at a few $1,000s. We said, whoa, you can't do that. We like it in 25D. We're a renewable technology. Leave us there. And they said, all right, fine, we'll do that. They kept trying to move us into the tech-neutral buckets with the other commercial technologies. And we went round and round and round with Wyden's staff on that, and they eventually said, fine, you guys are different, we're going to leave you. And if you look at the code, we are the only technology that remains in Section 48 after next year. They gave us that sort of special treatment, and it's because we worked with them so closely on this. So now the bill is done. We breathe this huge sigh of relief. I thought, I could just kick back and relax for a while, but that has proven not to be the case. There's a tremendous amount of work ongoing, and we're talking with DOE, Treasury, the White House, and Congress on a regular basis to ensure that they implement this law properly. There's a number of guidance measures that are going to be coming out. We will soon know more information about domestic content. There's a bonus credit for that, how you do direct pay, and how nonprofits are going to be able to avail themselves of those credits. And our star, in many ways, is rising on Capitol Hill, not only within Congress, where we have much greater recognition, but also in the White House and the executive agencies. 2 days ago, DOE made its announcement on a number of awards for community geothermal systems. I think there's about 12 or 15 projects that have been selected around the country for demonstration. This is a lot like what Donovan's doing. And DOE is funding this. It's getting a lot more attention, and I think that this is going to become something much more prevalent in terms of a federal focus. Rory Christian last night said it repeatedly. Persistence, drive, focus, that's what it's all about. And I'm sure that means a lot to everyone here, but that's what we're going to keep doing in Washington, and we appreciate all the support.
Did it. Good. Thanks so much, Ryan. All right. Zeyneb, you're up.
All right. And you can't see my notes because they're on the phone. Pages and pages. All right. Well, I also just want to say that the IRA, the geothermal rule that Ryan just described, when he says GEO Exchange did it, it's Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. Yes. So I don't think I've ever been so excited about something that has the word tax in it. But it's not just about like the investor tax credit that you've all heard about, where you can, doing right by labor, can get 30% investor tax credit on a project, add 10% for American made, add 10% for an energy community. And as the definitions of everything come out, it's an enormous amount of money accessible for projects. But it's a giant cake, probably bigger than we're really able to take in right now. But there are other layers we can add to this. I'm going to talk about taxes as a layer cake. So there's all of the home energy efficiency, building electrification funds. There's funds for workforce excellence. There's money throughout this very long document going across the industry that will help support what we are setting out to do. And I'd like to call out two of those. The first is in this section 1706, in case you've read the large document that is the IRA. And 1706 allocates money at the Loan Program Office at the DOE to energy infrastructure reinvestment. So if you have existing energy infrastructure and you have a plan to transition it to something that reduces emissions or removes emissions, say, for example, you have a bunch of buildings heated by fossil fuels and you're going to build a geothermal network and take them off fossil fuels, you can get a loan up to $250 billion. The program is capped, just in case you're dreaming really big, at $250 billion. And the current rate, is 4.1 to 4.2% fixed for 30 years. So just, playing that out for a moment in Massachusetts, our gas utilities, their rate for infrastructure, the loans they get for infrastructure going in the ground, are many percentage points higher than that, 8-9% for the utility bond rate. So you drop that many percentage points, you have an enormous pot of money. Dropping it 2 percentage points in Massachusetts would be equivalent to about $16,000 per residential unit to do what? Well, all kinds of things, like put in new heat pumps, et cetera, right? Upgrade electric. So there is this opportunity that's even bigger than the investor tax credit in some ways, that allows you to think at the scale of, say, the city of Ithaca or something. So go for it. Another random item, just recently, there were grants dispersed to gas utilities across the country for the replacement of leak-prone gas pipe. I think it's $285 million at the moment. It's a 5-year program. And there's nothing in that language that says you can't replace it with pipes filled with, say, water connected to boreholes. So there's another pot of money you might not see right away when you're looking at it. And so I just want to encourage everyone to realize how big, I don't think I even understand how big this is for this industry. And it's at all levels. The Department of Energy's Geothermal Technologies Office has funded our national labs to put the ground source heat pump and the network ground source heat pump into all of their tools. If you ever use Comstock or ResStock, there's going to be ground source heat pumps well connected in there. If you ever use UrbanOpt, that's going to have networked ground source heat pumps. So what's that going to do? It's going to drive demand, in my opinion. You're going to have more and more planners, urban planners, designers, analysts realizing what happens when you put the ground source heat pump and the network ground source heat pump into plants. And so I think, as was said before, we got to get the drills ready. I think that's, let me check my notes, but I think that's it for now.
Infrastructure bill? Infrastructure, did you talk about that? Isn't there another legislation?
There is, I think.
Yeah. You might have already said it because I was over, I'm easily distracted.
I think we've covered most of it, and I think there's probably many more things to discover. So collaborating and discussing and really having kind of a flow of information about who's accessing what, how, and sharing that across, it is a potentially narrow window, right? So that $250 billion at the loan program office at a fixed low rate for 30 years, it's only, you have to sign up for it. It's a first come, first serve, and you have to sign up for it by 2026. And we don't know what happens, 2 years in, next administration. So all of this is a now thing. And I think that's where I'm going to end. Good luck to everyone.
That's great. Thanks so much. So I think what we've heard is this started a while ago, long time ago, and takes a lot of work. That work has continued, and we got another big set of gains. It's broad-reaching in its implications for us, and I think next year it'll be interesting when we come back and we sort of understand some of those things better. But again, let's celebrate the fact that there's a lot of really new opportunity for us to take advantage of. And I want Zach to talk a little bit about just the implications of that on, real buildings, on building owners, on developers. How is this going to drive the industry?
All right, so John came over before and said I get the next 27 minutes to myself.
He's lying, as usual.
So I started in geothermal in 2008, which was an interesting time because, utility incentives were measured on the per box basis, $300, $500, $700 a box, not, potentially $1,000 or $2,000 a ton, plus that you might see today in New York State. There was no federal tax credit. And my uncle loved selling a geothermal system because he got to sell a nice boiler right next to it because they were designed for the cooling load, not 100% of the heating load, which meant you did somewhere between 70 and 80%. And it was really the high-end residential market. And then all of a sudden, this 30% tax credit comes out, but it has a $2,000 cap on it. So, it's been interesting to see the progression of the industry. And then, 2017, the tax credit went away. I was dating my now wife for only a few months. At 2 o'clock in the morning, got some very happy phone calls in February of 2018. Yeah, when the tax credit came back, and she wasn't quite understanding why I was so happy. She now understands. But, with the Inflation Reduction Act passing, it's kind of a very similar, moment about how, things changed. I say that the IRA was my wedding present because it got signed into law while I was on my honeymoon, which meant every one of my developers called me while I was on my honeymoon to ask how it would affect their bottom line of their project. So, that happens. But, we went from having a 10% tax credit on commercial projects, which was very tough to access. If the development entity didn't have a tax liability, you needed to put the geothermal system into a special purpose entity, bring equity investors in, do a 5-year flip structure, and then you were trying to sell it on a market that you had to try to sell it against a solar tax credit or wind tax credit that got 30%. That had a very clear regulatory framework to sell, so geothermal tax credits weren't really selling. Under the new IRA legislation, the tax credit has gone up to 30%. A little more complicated than that, but you can get up to 50% depending if you're in a clean energy community and if you build with domestic product, and for larger systems, build the systems at prevailing wage with an apprenticeship requirement. So geothermal now goes from being the most expensive technology in a lot of our projects to being the value engineering solution and being cheaper from a first cost perspective, which I never thought I would see. And it's a really interesting market, economics, going on there. In addition to the tax credits increasing, there's now a direct sale provision, which means you don't need to do structuring of the deal and incur $1 million of legal fees and accounting fees in order to sell a tax credit. And for nonprofits and municipalities, it's refundable. So if you don't have a tax base, you can still access it, which means you open up an entire government and municipal market that, might have invested in it before because they needed to decarb or, for other reasons. But it never really made financial sense for that municipal market. And now it does because they have access to the incentives. So we're seeing, so a project like One Java, where the mechanical system is a relatively expensive system to begin with compared to the cost of the ground loop. You might have 80 to 90% of your cost in your existing mechanical system. And that's a loaded cost by the time you put GC fees in, the line voltage wiring for heat pumps, all of those things. That then you add this 15% component or 20% component for the ground loop, and all of a sudden the ground loop effectively paid for itself as part of being able to monetize the tax credit. So it's really interesting on, especially the larger the project is, and the smaller percentage of the project the ground loop is as a percentage of the project, the more economically viable it was. That was never the case. The larger the project, the tougher the economics was always to make it work, and now it's completely reversed. So we're very excited to see this. We're very excited to see, New York City developers. I always say if I can figure it out in New York City, we can probably figure it out in any market. If I can figure out how to drill boreholes in Manhattan.
There's a song about that, Yeah.
That might have been before my time.
Yeah, it probably dates you. Yeah. Or dates me.
But no, so it's a very exciting time to be here. And, our hope is that, nothing changes in future legislations and that, kind of the open questions that's kind of holding back the industry a little bit. I know there's a deep dive session later, but what does 1 megawatt mean? You ask 20 different people, you get 25 different answers. And probably none of them will actually be the actual answer at the end of the day. So we're hopeful that as an industry, we can help push Treasury, and I know Ryan's working a lot on that right now, to actually be able to get some answers on some of these things so that there's more developer certainty. John just told me I have 20 more minutes. This is great.
Get your eyes checked, friend.
So yeah, with that, I think I'll actually give back my 2 minutes to John.
Wow. Well, I don't want them. I want to talk to the audience, actually. So great. So that, a terrific review. Just before we go to the audience, is there anything, I know that, Dan starts out and then he hears everybody else talk. Is there anything that the panel just wants to make a quick comment about before we go to audience questions? If not, then I'll open it up. Great. That's great. All right. So let's see. It's an expert panel. It's about the big changes. Looks like we got a question over here. In the white. And your name, please? Probably
Sandra, Hawk Drilling Company. The tax incentives, or pardon, the loan incentives of 4%, is there any way that could be extended to drillers trying to get drill rigs? Because right now we're looking at 9.
It looks like Zeyneb is going to start out here.
Yeah, this is on, yes. I am not the loan program office or even close. My understanding is that they're extremely flexible. They have stated to me and other people in the room that they're extremely flexible about figuring out how to use their money to drive innovation forward and take on risk that maybe the market is not interested in. However, the one core part of the energy infrastructure reinvestment is that it has to be replacing existing emitting fossil fuel infrastructure. And so the drill rig question I would shift towards Biden's effort to, I'm just going to blank on the Defense Production Act, yes. So the Defense Production Act is looking at driving heat pump. There's a portion of it where there's allocated funds to drive heat pumps forward in the U.S. as a Defense Production Act, so in defense of our nation. I think that it could be more easily argued that drill rig investment was part of that, and that would have to be done quickly. I believe it is closing out in the year.
Great.
Next month. Yeah, just to say a couple words on the Defense Production Act. So last summer, maybe late spring, the Biden administration came out with an executive order invoking the Defense Production Act, which is like a 100-year-old law that was used to compel industry to make parts for bombs during times of war. Well, oddly enough, heat pumps are now a matter of national security. And so heat pumps were one of 5 different sort of buckets that Biden enunciated in that executive order. That got whittled down to 2, critical materials and heat pumps. And so there was a request for information that came out several months ago, which we responded to and said, make sure you allow the geothermal heat pump industry to access these funds, and you should also allow the funds to be used for expansion of drilling capacity in the market, because that's a major pinch point for our industry. As Zeyneb said, the clock is ticking. Just last week, they announced the funding opportunity for $250 million for the heat pump industry. And anyone in this room who is either manufacturing heat pumps or is involved in the drilling side of the business ought to look at the FOA and potentially submit a request for funding. If you wanted to do something like that, come see me after the panel, and I'd be happy to work with you.
Yeah, I do think that that's something we need to help package to make it accessible, because a lot of those things that you just said, I'm sure if I own a drilling company, I'm like, I don't know if that's going to happen. We need to figure out a way to make it accessible to these folks. But I think a lot of what this is, we don't have all the details just yet, but there's a lot of opportunity even to address something that, if you need to make $1 million investment to grow your business, that's a big deal. And you hear everybody say, we need drillers, we need you to grow, but we're not making the $1 million investment, you are. So yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's something we need to keep chasing down and making it simple for the industry to access.
One other quick note. I just had to confirm that there are electric drill rigs. One other option is the Loan Program Office money could work with their rules if you are replacing or adding electric drill rigs as opposed to, say, diesel drill rigs. Then you've got it.
And that's why Zeynep's here. All right. I'll take Heather, and then I'll take you, John.
Heather Deese from Dandelion. I'm curious for the 4 of you, like, as you look across the whole industry with all of these changes that went into place last summer, where do you see the holes in the private sector? Like, if an investor came to you with a whole bunch of money and said, where do we need businesses that we don't have them yet in our sector?
To Zach.
I'm going to take us out of the holder to make it easier to play pass the baton. I think that we focus as an industry a lot on getting systems installed, but not on the long-term performance. So I think there's the opportunity for some, and I don't know exactly if it's a cloud-based software, but, some sort of supervisory software control that sits on top of it and monitors a large, swath of systems, and can say that, whether it's benchmarking compared to, how other systems in a major metropolitan area work, or if it's saying, when it was 7 degrees outside on Long Island, which is where I'm based, most systems were running at 38-degree loop temperature, and your system was 10 degrees cold, which means you're potentially airbound. So, I think there's a technology play out there that will allow to optimize systems after they get installed. And also help ensure client satisfaction, which will help ensure, more clients are willing to invest in technology.
So from an investment standpoint, though, are you also implying that we need a database that investors can have reliable performance?
I got asked by an agency recently to prove a claim about if a system was, a certain size and everything else. So if someone wants to make like a supercomputer 400 list of like the biggest geothermal systems out there by category, I would appreciate it as well. So, but no one's raising their hands. All right. But no, so I think that, yes, to be able to get the data, you actually need to know what's out there and be a way to do it. Part of that's connected controls. Part of that is what BMS systems are you doing on the buildings and open protocols. And, on the residential side, is there, some way for all the manufacturers to be able to talk together and be able to view them in central portals, all of that stuff.
All right. And I think Dan has something to add.
Yeah, one of the challenges we have as an industry, and this came up when this tech neutral thing came along in Wyden's office, was we don't have an easy way to measure our output. Solar is so easy. I have solar on my home, my other home, our business is a completely net zero campus, but you can just see what it does every day. The geothermal, there's some significant challenge. Hey, well, we could meter the thermal energy at in and out of the well field. That's only a partial picture. If you have multiple units in a building, a lot of that energy is being recirculated in the building. So one of the things we're missing is that metric. How much did we produce? They all ask, well, how many megawatts, on the Hill, everywhere you went, how many megawatts have you guys put in? We can measure thermal energy in megawatts, which you'll hear about later, but we've got to develop a way to put like an MPG meter or whatever our production of renewable energy might be on a system, and it's a lot more complicated than it seems. Even measuring thermal energy will tell you, if you measure the flow rate into a loop and you only got a 3-degree delta T, a very small error in that delta T is a big off in the amount of energy you think you had. So that's not exactly the best way to do it. I think it's probably going to have to be done at each individual heat pump, collecting data on what they're doing and then, summing that up. That is hurting our industry and holding us back, that we don't have an agreed upon way to measure our result. We can't produce the big graphs of how much we've put online or what we've done, and we need to be able to do that.
So we're going to extend our panel to Xiaobing Liu from Oak Ridge National Lab is going to have some comments about collecting information.
I think it's just a question. I can experience the energy here just exactly what I experienced in 2008. I think remember Dan at that time he said this is perfect storm. At that time everything looks like we get this industry be very in a successful path. For this IA tax incentive, we know it's there's some time period about that. So right now we have good policies, but if this tax incentive expired, how can this industry keep this momentum to develop more projects? And also we saw there are lots of technology that kind of competitive to this technology, such as cold climate heat pump, all those other things. So what is your vision about how to make sure this industry can grow even beyond this IA tax?
Okay, yep,
credits?
I think that's great. Thanks so much.
I have something, and if somebody else wants to jump in, go ahead. But what I have thought all along, we lived in eras where they were coming and where they were going, and various kinds of incentives. And my thought was always that one of the most important things that we can do, and we as everybody in this room, is we have to make sure we are putting in landmark, high quality, well-performing projects, because that installed base, as it grows, you become part of that accepted norm out there. One of the things this whole IRA is about is to break up. It's one of those fundamental shifts of trying to break up the typical way things are done. Engineers want to crank out versions of the plans they've been doing. GCs all have relationships with mechanicals, and things are just following that norm. Breaking that up takes a 2x4 to the forehead, so to speak. And this act as you come in some of the sessions and see what the benefits are economically, we have that. So while we have it, we better use it right, because I can tell you in 2008, a lot of bad systems went in. A lot of players got in the industry, had no clue what they were doing, or didn't even care. They were just trying to make money, rake in what they could, and you will never have a sustainable future. You know, for every one of those bad installations, it takes probably 20 good ones to overcome it. And so I think it's imperative for everyone here that we are doing things right, and if you don't know how to do it right, there's plenty of people that can show you what right is around this room. And make sure what we're doing is high quality, it's working well, because without credits, that's our future, an installed base. You know, my goal in our company is get as many in the ground as we can and make sure every one of them could be a reference, that nobody would be afraid to call any one of them. That's how I view it.
So.
And I'll just say, in the absence of federal support, it's the states. I mean, look at when Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. It was the states that picked up the slack there. So I think it's got to be a focus on maintaining what we have at the federal level, but also really engendering support, a range of support at the state level.
And I just want to go back to the data question again, and add that the national labs are currently attempting to count installs in order to give us a number, which is incredibly critical for a number of things, including moving forward. And so everyone in this room helping work with them to try to get that number as accurate as possible is one thing we can do. And then, you know, on that critical question of metrics and data, there's a panel later today called The Data We Need that's going to attempt to tackle that and look at what metrics we can standardize to really be able to communicate to decision makers who don't need to understand how a borehole works, but just need to know what they're going to get for it.
Great. Oh, Zach, you're killing me.
I have to use all my 20 minutes. No. So on the, you know, how do you ensure, you know, installations go in absence of incentives? If the All Electric Building Act in New York State passes, you know, I know that's a state issue, but, you know, if you remove the access to natural gas and the 100-foot rule, so a residential house, you have $15,000 or $20,000 of connection cost, which is the cost of a ground loop for a single-family house that's getting, you know, rate-based over 85 years. So as utility-owned thermal networks come out, the cost of conversion comes down, and it'll never hit quite parity with air source heat pumps, but the economic equation will then be, what is the incremental cost? And now all of a sudden I'm saving money. I don't have the unit outside of my house. The equipment lasts longer. And I think the market will naturally gravitate if you can deal with the upfront cost and the transferability of, you know, average home ownership is 7 years. That's probably around the return investment of geothermal systems. So if you decouple it, you know, you can massively increase the market.
Wow. Shockingly lucid. I love it. All right. Let's.
And to think I helped close down the bar last night.
Yeah. So, John Thomas, you had a question for us.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I guess I would just say I would want to respectfully and thoroughly reiterate Dan Ellis's advice on the quality of installs and spread the word. People that are motivated to be here, I'm not as concerned about. It's the wildcatters out there that say, sure, I can do a geo job. Help us guard against that. It will hurt the industry. Now to my question or request. I think there's a couple elements that would benefit the audience, Ryan or Dan, of issues that are still open issues that we're clarifying from the IRA as it relates to the tax treatment and qualifications for the bonus rate, like 1 megawatt. I think it would be good to update the audience on that. And secondly, the new aspect of direct pay and transferability for nonprofits. I think that's a big deal, and it affects some of the people in the audience. A couple comments on those two areas would be helpful.
Go to the next session where they're going to talk about all those things. But I will say briefly, I mean, Zach talked about this. In the law, in the investment tax credit, so the commercial credit that's part of the IRA, there is a trigger or a threshold where if you hit it and it's based on system size,
you have to pay prevailing wage and hire apprentices for that job. The law says 1 megawatt measured in alternating current or equivalent thermal energy. Well, you know, people have said to me it's 284 tons is you convert a megawatt into capacity and thermal capacity and get that amount. But Dan, Dr. Liu, a number of other people have worked this out, because in a distributed heat pump system, all of your units are not going to be operating at capacity at the same time. How do you apply that diversity factor and then a sizing factor, because you're always going to round up? And we came up with 445 tons is what we think a 1 megawatt net thermal output ought to be in a distributed GEO system. So we've submitted that to the Department of Treasury. We've had a number of meetings around it, and they're just busy. You know, it's hard for them to render a verdict when they have pressure to get all this other stuff done. Direct pay is coming soon. Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, Lily Batchelder, came out 6 weeks ago and provided a roadmap, sort of a guide to the order in which they're going to release guidance. They've come out with EV guidance, energy communities. Direct pay is coming in the next couple months.
You have like 30 seconds.
I was just going to make a comment. In all the years looking over the industry, it takes 3 things to make the market really fly. You know, you have to have high energy costs, you have to have some form of incentive, and you have to have an economy where things are being built, renovated, that there's, you know, a good economic situation. We've really only had brief periods where actually 3 of those existed, and actually, as long as there's 2 really solidly, we can do pretty well. Right now, I think we are at, you know, a pretty good situation. You know, I mean, anything could change in a heartbeat, economy-wise or whatever, but we have all the things lined up. And, you know, the next problem is going to be drill capacity. I can just tell you that's going to be the problem, you know. And so, anyway, we should just be thankful for what we have. Most encouraging thing is all of you in this room, the new people that are going to carry this industry forward. I just love seeing it. I love seeing people I have no clue who they are that are doing great things.
All right. Thanks so much. Let's give a hand to the panel for their contributions. And